This has been a rough week for our community. In light of the horrific tragedy in Orlando this weekend, I'm so glad that we can really come together today to build bridges within our community and bridges that make us stronger as a whole. So we can support our youth to grow up safer than we did and loving themselves in ways that we didn't know how to. I think the shooting has really reawakened a fear in a lot of us, and that fear for our safety and survival in a world that wants to harm us. Maybe this fear has faded over time as we've gotten older and as a society, as we've all finally started to grow up. With so much greater visibility in the media and with hard-won legal victories like gay marriage, same-sex parental rights, employment discrimination protections, many of us have begun to feel almost like society has started to value us. Many of us in this room work at companies that offer us luxuries like paid parental leave for same-sex partners, paid gender affirmation surgery for trans people, even LGBT resource groups that throw events like this with free happy hour, which is why I know you guys are all here. But let's remember that so many of these advances really benefit the professional class only. And there are still so many LGBTQ people right here in the Bay that are still every day harassed at work. They must fight for basic health care, housing, and people who live in a constant or near constant threat of violence. The fear that we're all feeling this week, this brutal reminder that there are people out there who would do us harm, who want us to hide and hate us for even existing, this fear has never faded for many people in our community. Even here, which is America's gay mecca, San Francisco, people in our community are still fighting to survive, to feel safe, to be respected, and to be seen. Google's theme for Pride this year is Pride for Everyone. And I hope today this theme really is a call to action for those of us with relative privilege, especially those of us working in tech, to show up for those of us who are still fighting for basic safety, for a home, for a voice, and for a place in our society and our community. We chose to highlight Bay Area LGBTQ youth at this event because so many of them are impacted disproportionately by poverty, violence, and oppression. So today, let's stand in solidarity with our queer youth who know the struggle, and despite it all, are still resilient and brilliant. Without further ado, I want to introduce our youth speaker, because we want, of course, to not be talking about youth and without inviting and having a youth voice here. So this is Pablo Rodriguez. Pablo, hello. You good?
Awesome.
So I'll just say a few words about Pablo. He's an undocumented, queer, two-spirit Latino, a graduate of Mission High School where he was president of their GSA, active in Latino youth organizing groups, and an organizer of his school's annual drag show. He was recently awarded the Equality Scholarship and the Colin Higgins Youth Courage Award, which is, for those of you who, I guess you do know what this is, a national LGBT recognition that's only awarded to 3 youth every year for their contributions to the queer movement. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Pablo is currently attending CCSF and leading the Undocu Workforce Program at Lyric. And let's welcome Pablo. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. I was on my flight into LA last week, and I was like with a huge headache because it was my first time getting on a plane. And for most of the people here, probably wasn't the first time, but for me it was. So that was really cool. Well, before I start telling my story, I wanna thank the creator for one more day of sun, for one more day of moon, for all of the elements that are around us right now, to all of the directions, to the Mother Tonantzin, la Madre Tierra, la Virgen de Guadalupe, the woman with many names that is always taking care of us. So with that, I want to start with colonization, murder, rape. My name is Pablo Rodriguez. I'm currently living on a mission, and I like to see myself, well, I don't like to see myself, but I feel like I'm one of the last people currently living on a mission with this skin tone. I identify as queer, gay, two-spirit, which is a recent term that I'm reclaiming. I have been living in the Bay in San Francisco for I don't know how many years, but I've been here since I was 14 years old. I am still undocumented. Um, so I was without my mom for almost 8 or 9 years, I believe, ever since she left me to come out here. So there was a big disconnection between her and I. So when I came out here, and I came out to her 2 years after, the disconnection was bigger. So let's pretend that my connection to her was like from that distance, from there. She was standing right there, I was standing right there. And every time that I would sit on the table, it was like seeing a stranger that I didn't know, because the only thing that I was able to recognize was her voice. After I said, "Mom, I'm gay," I was out of that window, literally, because she kicked me out. Time after, I finally came back home, and I took on the initiative to start actually getting to know her. So it was 2 levels that I had to deal with on how to start approaching her and getting to know her as a mother, and then also allowing her to start getting to know me. So I started by asking her, "So what is your favorite color?" Because I didn't know what was her favorite color. And then dipping into other conversations that started developing with time. Going into Mission High was really challenging for a lot of reasons. One of them has to do with language. I didn't even know how to say hi. All of the words that I'm saying right now, that I'm coming out with my lengua, I didn't know how to say any of these words. So I'm like, yay, I know how to speak English now. So then, which was challenging, but still was able to manage to put on a drag show in a public school for everybody. And everybody was attending, and all of the parents were coming into the room like, what is this school doing? Like, why are teachers on high heels? Why are students doing this? And it's like, because we can. So going to school again was really challenging as well, because the whole language barrier, and also because even within the school, there is not really a focus on undocumented queer youth. Usually, you have a lot of personas coming and teaching on how to vote and how to sign up for all of like these things, and a lot of the programs and a lot of the services that they offer a lot of the times require a social security number. So you can imagine how awkward it is sitting in a room and like they're telling you to vote when you clearly know that you can't. So that was one of the things that I noticed, especially in Mission High School. It was like all of us, well, I at least knew most of the undocumented kids in that high school. So let's pretend we're like in Mission High School right now, and like half of you are undocumented. So when you have like a person there talking about voting, and half of the class is like, looking at each other like, are we really sitting here? So that's one of many things that happen within the public system as a whole. And as I mentioned before, I also experienced homelessness right after I came out to my mother. And that left me in a very risky and tricky situation, because a lot of people were telling me, "Oh, you should contact a lawyer. We can do this, we can do that." I was sort of like suing her. And I was like, I don't want to do that, because that can risk her being able to continue working here, or even being allowed to stay here. So it's like, I don't want to do that. So coming out as a queer is challenging. It's hard. It puts you at this place where you don't exactly know where to go. And a lot of programs, again, don't exactly know how to deal with that. A lot of programs are more focused on LGBT, but not exactly LGBT people of color or undocumented. So again, it's like the whole intersectionality thing that we have to start talking about what intersectionality is, and not just talking, but actually seeing how that plays a role in society. So I a lot of places are like, well, you know, you can get housing, you can get that, but if you have a social, I didn't. So I had to like maneuver myself into a lot of different ways. And that's how I got to Lyric, and that's how I got to meet my mentor, Ek Martinez. And, you know, I was like always looking for resources. And that sort of leads me into the fact that in San Francisco, I have only been here since I was 14, and right now I'm 21. And it's crazy how the lack of resources for people like me, it's like the only place that is right now working with documented queer youth of color is Lyric, and I'm leading that. There is no other place around the Mission or any other place around the San Francisco that is working with us youth. Even and that's something that I also have to deal with, because we talk about colonization, we talk about genocide as something that happened 500 years ago, but it's not true. It still continues to happen every single day. So, and again, we also talk about, I put it on here, the manifest destiny, and we talk about segregation. Manifest destiny is still happening on the Mission. Segregation still continues to happen because I have to travel all the way to Auckland just to get tested, because Magnet, every single time that I attend Magnet, they tell me, oh, you came too late. Can you come earlier by 7 a.m.? And I live all the way in Balboa, and I have to travel all the way to Magnet, and I can't be there on time. So segregation still happens. I have to travel all the way to the East Bay just to get HIV and STD tested. I have to travel all the way to the East Bay just to meet my friends, the ones that used to live on the Mission. I have to go all the way to the East Bay just to go and dance. I have to go all the way to the East Bay just to talk about how radical my thoughts and ideas are. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this talk just really touched on a lot of the subjects that we're going to be speaking about with the rest of the panel, and all these issues that are so important. And so thank you once again for coming and being the voice of youth, even though, you know, there's countless people, as you're saying, that are in need of services in the city, in the Bay Area. And that's why today we brought several youth service providers to talk a little bit more about what we can do for youth, what's going on the front lines, people who work on the ground with youth every day, and in particular queer youth, to empower and overcome a lot of these barriers that Pablo talked about.
So I'm Stephanie, and I run Our Space, which is a queer and trans youth center in Hayward. It's a program of Bay Area Youth Center and Sunny Hills Services. We will be celebrating year 6 in August, which is really exciting. We serve over 150 young people each year through different programs. We started Our Space really with the idea of centering queer and trans youth who are impacted by systems and holding them at the heart of everything we do, and really recognizing them for their strength and their power, and holding their needs and experiences at the center. What we found when we started Our Space 6 years ago was that I worked, the organizations that Our Space is a part of works a lot with foster youth. So I was a mental health clinician carrying a caseload working with foster youth, and many of my young people were queer and trans identified. And as I started trying to link them to services in the Bay Area, they wouldn't link. They were like, I'm not going to go to this place and try to be out about my foster care status. And there were a lot of barriers that they experienced when they tried to access LGBTQ services in the East Bay. And so we really started Our Space holding foster care youth at the center. So the way Our Space plays out right now is that we have a community center with sort of typical community center programming, like movie night, queer and trans support circle. We have an intergenerational community dinner every month, which everybody in this room would be invited to participate in. It's a really sweet community building event. So we do things like that. We have mental health services for queer and trans youth. We go out into the community and do workshops in schools and with other providers. And we also do a lot of really specific work with Alameda County Foster Care. So we work with their child welfare workers and do trainings for them and coaching and consulting. A lot of county workers think that they don't have any queer youth on their caseloads or that they've never worked with a gay youth. And we all know that that's not true because queer and trans youth are disproportionately represented in the foster care system. We do a lot of work with them. We do a lot of work with families of queer and trans youth who are in foster care and try to get queer and trans youth who are in foster care out of foster care or back to a more permanent situation. So that's a very mini overview of what we do. We also host East Bay Youth Pride, which is going on its 4th year. It's on October 22nd, and there's some flyers back there. It's the only youth pride that happens in the East Bay, and it was started by young people and is run every year by young people. So you can totally volunteer or come hang out with us at East Bay Youth Pride. Sweet. I'll pass to Kate, who I adore.
Hi, Kate Klimquim, Program Manager at Castro Youth Housing Initiative. It is one of several programs at Larkin Street. This program, it is geared towards LGBTQ houseless youth, ages 18 to 24. I think given with the housing situation in the Bay Area, there's a large need for housing, especially for young people who come from, all throughout the Bay Area, California, even in the United States, outside of the country. They come to San Francisco thinking, oh, rainbows and unicorns, I'm gonna find my community. And they come and face reality, and it's not so much. So at Castro Youth, we have 30 beds in hotels and housing in the Castro district, which helps, youth begin to build their communities and whatnot. And we have case management services, which helps link folks to mental health services, educational, employment services, health linkages. I think we have a lot of trans young people who come in and, just kind of want to work on their gender affirming surgery. And so we have a lot of great partnerships within the community, such as the LGBT Center, Dimensions Clinic, where we help young people realize and recognize, their goals for personal growth. It's a 2-year program, or up until folks are 25. And with that, folks are able to save a lot of money. 30% of their income goes towards rent, quote unquote. And it's really a savings program, which is really great. And folks can exit with a lot of money to help, kind of get their footing in the door. I could go on and on, but I figure I'll pass it along.
We all do so much up here, so.
Hi, everybody. My name is Zakia Harris. I'm from Oakland, California. I'm one of the co-founders of Hack the Hood. Some of you might have voted for us. We actually won the Google Impact Challenge about a few years ago, so thank you. We are a nonprofit based in Oakland. We're currently working throughout the Bay Area. We engage low-income youth of color, specifically in technology. Our core offering is a 6-week boot camp where we pair young people one-to-one with a local small business in their community, and they build a website for a local cleaners, artist, consultant, mom and pop shop, really lifting up the voices of those who are not on Google Maps and are not currently discoverable online, and making sure that they have an opportunity to really participate in the changes that are happening in the city. The young people that we serve are 15 to 23-ish. Many of them are undocumented in the foster care system. We have young people that are teen parents, facing a variety of barriers in addition to being part of the LGBTQ community. We also have a lot of staff who also identify in that way. So I think a lot of our model is very culturally relevant, and it's also about reflecting the communities that we serve. And we really try to do that through all aspects of our organization. I'll pass it on.
Hi, everybody. Buenas tardes. My name is Eric Martinez. I work with San Francisco Unified School District, and I oversee support services for LGBT youth. It has been in existence for about 25 years. We're turning 25 this year. What else do I want to say? Oh my gosh, blinking out. That's right. I have to mention this, or my boss will say something to me. It's the first fully integrated LGBT support services program in a school district. That happened here in San Francisco. I was like, I knew I was going to forget that. For San Francisco Unified, I think this topic is extremely relevant. 90% of the youth who attend SF public schools are students of color. Then that should be no surprise then that the majority, about 90% of our queer youth are also students of color. And really the goal of our program is to create sustainable support services programs at each individual school sites where we have activities, information, and education for all students, targeted skill building and support services for groups of students. So for example, gay straight alliances, or what they're called now, gender and sexuality alliances are an example of that. And also making sure that our schools have one-on-one support services. So making sure we have social workers and culturally informed nurses as well.
All right, hi, I'm Jawo. I'm an artist and activist and youth mentor in Oakland. And I've been doing mentoring with youth, primarily youth of color, in Oakland. Previously working with students trying to get into college, mostly first-generation college students. And as of recently, helping youth entrepreneurs developing their own, realizing their own economic sustainability themselves.
Thanks, everyone. Let's give the panelists a round of applause. So I want to start off just maybe someone can reiterate a definition of intersectionality, because all of you are working in the context of intersectionality, and I know Pablo touched on that. Does anyone want to give me just kind of their definition of what that means specifically in the context of this work? Zakia, thanks.
I would like to offer another analogy, and this is the way I think of intersectionality. We all know about nature, right? Nature is an ecosystem, and everything in an ecosystem is connected. There is no such thing as linear thinking or compartmentalization. From the very smallest microorganism to the largest predator, there's an interrelationship and connectedness. And I believe that every community, particularly indigenous communities throughout the world, that has always been the view and the perspective that we have used for ages and ages. And I think that intersectionality is like a really cool modern PC way of saying that. But I think we also need to ground ourselves, and I loved how you opened up with the 4 directions, because you're grounding us in nature, you're grounding us in that remembrance, and so I think that we need to kind of continue that perspective. So that's what I think of. I think of all the connectedness, that you can't talk about police brutality without talking about immigration, without talking about capitalism, without talking about how it affects people of color. We understand the interrelatedness of them, and I think most importantly, we need to design for that. We need to be thinking about in our design, so we're not just addressing one particular symptom. We're looking at the whole pie and looking how we can address it from the ground up.
Awesome, thank you. I think the language that we use when we have these dialogues and expanding the language and the concepts that we use is really important. So to kind of integrate that, can some of you give some stories of youth and the ecosystem that they are living in and coming out of, and how the different factors of their identities and their environment really affects the way that they have access to the resources that you all are trying to give and trying to connect youth to?
All right, I can talk about a young man that I've been working with for a few years now, from when he started in high school, a gay young Latino. And in terms of like issues that were facing him from this intersectional point, he was living in Deep East Oakland, attending Castlemont, which, if you know, Oakland is like out on 90 or something. It's a tougher school. There's definitely some incidents of violence that happen there. He lives in a neighborhood where, shootings, drive-bys, domestic abuse, they exist there. His parents are also, they're both immigrants. They don't speak English. Neither of them had attended college. I think only one of his parents had finished high school or equivalent to that. So when he was trying to get, thinking about attending college, the issues of his sexuality, being Latino, so he was in a lot of hiding, and then trying to access resources that he didn't know, his family didn't really know. So he was speaking with me as like a kind of a confidant in terms of his sexuality, but then he really needed to access resources and help for, continuing his education, finding financing for that, which was actually probably one of the harder barriers for him. And, doing all of that within his geographic place that was, violent and under-resourced overall. So it's not like he had just one of these barriers to face or to overcome or deal with, but, there were multiple layers that he had to, deal with. And I think actually his parents still don't know about his sexuality. He's still in the closet with them, and he still lives with them out of financial need and stuff. So this, 3 years down the road, he's actually still facing a number of these challenges based on his, the class, the immigration status of his parents, his race, his sexuality altogether.
Sitting up here thinking about the young people that I've worked with, I guess a good general example I have is working with multiracial young people who initially came out as lesbian or gay, and yet as they explore their identity, begin to transition to another gender. And so, trying to work with with that, as a transition from male to female, the loss of access and privilege as a male-bodied person, working with internalized racism from their families and communities of origin, and how that all plays out with this young person who also came up with, some class privilege. And so as they come to San Francisco and begin to get involved with, just kind of homeless youth organizations and just kind of that loss of privilege, being able to, begin working with community organizations, really focused on racial identity and working through, how do they navigate those systems. So in that, there's a lot of processing to be done, and how do we build folks' self identities in the face of so many kind of challenging situations of, coming up without privilege, just kind of coming in, recognizing how they lose privilege in a sense, and also coming to,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about a young person I've had the honor and privilege of working with since she was 14. She's 19 now, and she came to our space when she was 14 because she lived in a group home that our agency runs. And after about a month of coming to our space, she came out as a trans girl, which was really exciting, and she was really affirmed for her identity. But when you're in the foster care system when you're in the foster care system, period, and then when you're in the foster care system as like a queer or trans person, and then you're in the foster care system as like a trans girl of color, she identifies as Black. She had a really rough time of it. And then she was bounced around from different placements. And I think that one of the things that happens, right, is that a lot of providers in the foster care system are white, look like me, are a lot of white women. And we bring our own frames to the situation, right? And so I think it's really easy for young people in the foster care system, especially when they're queer and trans youth of color, to get read as violent, to get read as aggressive, to get read as they don't care about school, to get read as all these awful things. But what's really going on is that they're getting harassed in their placements all the time, and people, like, their safety is in jeopardy all the time. So it's easy, so like leaving a foster care placement is actually like a really amazing act of survival, right? To leave. So, so this young person's been in foster care since they were 14. There's a law in California that's called AB 12 that extended foster care to the age of 21. So 18 to 21-year-olds are allowed to be in foster care, right? Which is actually kind of an awesome thing because you're supposed to be able to have housing when you're in foster care and you have access to like a lot more resources. This young person whom I love so much is, has bounced around a lot and had like my phone number written on her backpack. So she would work the streets a lot and sort of get trafficked from Oakland to LA and back again. So she was gone a lot of the time. And she's one of those young people, as I'm sure that we all have these young people in our lives who are always like, I hope you're alive. Like, I want you to be alive, but I don't know if you're alive or if you're not. And then you get a phone call every few months and you hear their voice. So 1 year ago, she showed up at my office, and it was like 5:30 at night or something, like the end of the day. And she looked rough, like she looked not in good shape. And she had literally just gotten back from LA. I hadn't seen her in over a year, or heard from her in over a year. And she was 19 at this point, so still legally supposed to be able to be in foster care, right? Like you all are with me on this. So I say, let's get you food. You're here. Let's do this. I'm going to call your county worker right now. We're gonna find you a placement. Her foster care case was in a county that's outside of Alameda County. So for me as a provider, I don't hold the relationship with those other providers as well. So we get the county worker on the phone, and they can do nothing. They say, "Oh, you're a non-minor dependent. You're 19. You're not in work or school right now, so you don't meet the requirements," which is actually not true, y'all. There's she didn't have to be in work or school, but there was nowhere to go. So I think, and then I spent 2 or 3 hours on the phone trying to find housing for this young person, and I can echo like the Bay Area housing crisis. In the East Bay, there are very limited options in terms of shelters, and the main youth shelter had a wait list that was 43 deep. Other shelters that we may have been able to get her into were mostly men's shelters, where it wasn't necessarily going to be safe for her as a trans girl. So what we end up doing after all this time is that I coach her, which I just want to name this as like probably one of the lowest moments of like my professional career. But I coach her into what to say to get her a bed at John George Psychiatric Hospital so that she can have a safe bed for the night, because she doesn't want to ride the bus all night, or she doesn't, we can't figure out anywhere where she can go. And if anybody's ever had an experience with an adult psychiatric hospital, they're not necessarily safe places for the queer and trans community. So anyway, I say all this just that she has a lot going on in her life, right? And with a team of lawyers that we were able to connect her with, and with lots of other supports, it has still been like an infinite struggle to get her back enrolled in the foster care system. And so she's currently in prison right now. But I think about this a lot, right? I think a lot about like if she was a white, straight, cisgender young person who acted a certain way and talked a certain way to county workers, would her trajectory be much different than what it is right now? And I think, when she gets out, she could in theory have access to like post foster care housing, but she doesn't have a family. She doesn't have like emotional connected support community in her life. She doesn't have anybody supporting her with like real job skills and job training and things like that. So just, to think about like what's going on for this young person and intersectionality. I think also really quickly, I'll just say that the life expectancy of a Black trans woman in our country is 35 years old. And so we should say it again, right? The life expectancy of a Black trans woman in our community is 35 years old. And so we need to hold that.
Thanks so much for sharing that story and for the other stories that were shared. I think part of why I invited everyone that, is doing this on the ground work is to show what is happening in our communities, in our LGBTQ community, and to really get us motivated to understand where people are coming from and to act on that and get involved in any way we can. I think, it's important to know how all these different factors, different aspects of identities combine to limit access to resources. And even though we're all here coming from, resources that are funded, they're set up, they're supposed to be giving care and giving services and getting, youth, getting kids, teenagers, children out of these situations that you're describing. There's so many factors that have to do with the racial identity and queer identity and oppression that intersect to limit access to those resources that are supposed to be helping them. I was going to ask about, what are some typical misconceptions about the youth that you all serve? And I think, Stephanie, you just touched on a lot of those. Why can't people, if there's services like foster care, all the way until 21, why aren't they in it? Does anyone else want to speak to misconceptions about the youth that they work with, and also maybe some innovative ways that they've identified their needs and met their needs in the face of all of these barriers?
Well, I've worked with young people my whole career, over 13 years, and I've worked in a variety of settings as a classroom teacher, after-school programs. And I think one misconception that I always hear, particularly in workforce development, which is the work I'm doing now, is a surprise at the brilliance of young people of color. Oh my God, they're so smart. Oh, they really get it. They really know how to code. They really want to be better. They're great leaders. And then this thinking of like, we're making them leaders, or we're imbuing them with something. And I think that our young people are so resilient. Young people are so freaking resilient. And I feel like all the young people I've had the opportunity to work with have overcome tremendous barriers every day, just getting up in the morning to make it to the program. To your point, all the hurdles that most adults would have failed, like at hurdle number 1, literally. And they get no credit for that. And the expectation is just like, oh, well. And I think that a lot of work gets put into, the tools, whether we want to train them to do this or train them to do that. But we don't talk about the trauma. We don't talk about the 21st century skills. We spend a lot of time at Hack the Hood talking about the future of work and the new set of toolbox that every young person has to have now. And the fact that all of the rules that apply to everyone in this room are dead. They don't apply anymore. What it takes for a young person to navigate childhood into any type of career trajectory is completely nuanced now. It has to do with your social network, who you know. It has to do with your navigational capital, your ability to see where you want to go and to understand what it means to get there. You have to be able to speak. You have to be able to code switch. There's so many other things that you have to be able to do, and it's not just the technical skill. And I think a lot of times we just focus on this technical thing that a young person's supposed to know, like we got to where we are because of just the technical skill, right? Like we all navigated something new, but when we're talking about communities, because we're othering these communities as someone else, we want to put a new set of rules on them, and that those rules just don't fit anymore. So I think that we have to, again, I think it's a design challenge, right? We have to start designing differently, thinking differently, and really starting with the assets of our young people. And so at Hack the Hood, we do a Strengths Finder assessment. You guys probably did that with all of our young people, and we have found it to be like, it just kind of makes everyone's back get a little bit, stand taller when they recognize the fact that they have gifts, they were born with strengths that are something that they love and something that they're good at. And we really focus on that and think about technology as a tool that they can use to kind of harness that work. So we're not kind of putting them on a track towards anything. We're allowing them to really harness their gifts. And, we don't limit the conversation around technology to a few companies like Google and Facebook. There is no career trajectory that any of our young people are going to go into where technology is not at the center of that. We don't think about being an entrepreneur as something that you have to become. Everybody's an entrepreneur in the 21st century. It doesn't matter if you got a main job, a side hustle, a passion project. You're not just going to have one job. You're probably going to have 30. So how do we prepare young people? And then when we start adding all the barriers, oh my God, now you've got the low income, the youth of color, the queer, the homeless, the mom, all those other barriers get stacked on top of that. And then when we talk about housing and we talk about homeless, when we look at some of the homeless folks on the streets, we're working with their youth. That's another level of trauma of like seeing auntie, sleeping in a tent. And so just not recognizing all of those connections and that young people are kind of surviving against all odds. So, I'm just proud of all of our youth. I think that young people really get it. They have the answers. They don't need anybody kind of telling them. We really need to listen more. We need to be quiet and let the youth speak, and really just kind of use them as our teachers because they have so much vision and inspiration to guide us in. And I think that's part of what it means to just really honor youth where they're at and also kind of start debunking those misconceptions.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I super agree with all that. I think a common misconception that I've seen a lot of young people deal with is that they don't know what's best for them, that they're young, they don't know the real world, or they don't know like what's in their own best interest, but that's all usually many times coming from people that aren't facing the same problems and struggles that those young people are facing. So if anybody knows the problems that they're facing and how to deal with those problems, it's those young people that are dealing with them. They're growing up in a world, or they've been living in a world that didn't exist before. And, like thinking about how maybe we grew up, we didn't have the technologies and the things that were going on that's happening now. And so they're facing problems that some of them are new problems and some of them are, systemic problems that have always existed. But they definitely know, like, they want the best for themselves. It's not like they don't want the best possible life they could get, but you see a lot of times people with money, affluence, privilege coming in saying, well, we know the best way for you to be economically empowered. And so you follow this path that we followed and you'll be in the same place as us, when it's like they're starting from a whole different, they're on a different island in another country. Like it's a totally different trajectory that they're gonna have to follow. And so if anything, like, if you maybe provide access to resources or access to knowledge, they can solve the problems for themselves. Like we're not trying to solve problems for them. We just want to maybe give them tools or tips or skills so that they can solve their own problems. Because chances are, I have no idea what the problem they're facing is to begin with. I might conceptually understand a problem they're facing with, but like, they have the experience of what this problem is and how to solve it in the best way for them and their community.
Yeah, I kind of want to add to what both of you are saying. Queer youth of color are fierce. They are strong. I think back to just some of those early documented experiences on film. Paris is Burning is a great example of how communities can create their own communities of resilience and cultural capital and social capital, even when facing multiple points of marginalization. I think one of the unique things about, and where I sit in the school district is that I get to see kids at multiple ages, right? I get to see them in elementary school, I get to see them in middle and high. And currently, I'm in the process of hiring some staff for some of our schools, and I'm seeing graduates return after college, to want to work with their schools. And one thing I'm noticing is how experiences of marginalization also affect the way they show up because they have to work twice as hard to be perceived to be strong, right? It's not about whether or not they're strong or not. It is about perception. And to me, you know, when we look at just looking at queer candidates, you know, our white queer candidates are coming in with that sense of entitlement, that sense of like, I am capable, I can do this, right? And be able to sell themselves really well. Whereas a lot of our, you know, candidates of color, they're groomed to think that they're lucky to be given the little bits of pieces that they're given, right? So how they come off in a job interview can be very, very different. Even though on paper, they are just as amazing, they are just as strong. So I think about, you know, Pablo and my first meeting with him. When I first met Pablo, he was at Mission. He was a sophomore, freshman. I mean, this kid was fierce. I was like, why am I coming into this school? It looks like he has it going on. But it was really a matter of like, how do I, as a queer adult, as a person who has achieved privilege, but also understands the path that he's going through, to mentor him to not just find his strength, but believe in his strength, because it's already there, right? He just needs to see it, and they just need to believe it. So I think when we think about queer youth of color in particular, is that they have the answers, they have the power, and it's our responsibility as adults to help them realize that, right? To show a mirror and be like, no, you got it. Right? Don't believe this other BS. Like, you have it and you can do it.
Thank you. Yeah, applause. On that note, I guess, what do you see, where do you see queer leadership and queer youth leadership taking place, and what form is that taking with the youth that you're working with? We talk about a lot about the barriers that they're facing, but how are they, you know, surpassing our expectations in terms of taking on their own leadership?
Well, I think that, again, we need to ground ourselves in the reality. The March on Washington was organized by a queer man. You can Google a great speech by Huey P. Newton, founder of the Black Panther Party, talking about how the Black nationalist movement needs to work with queers as allies and hold them close. The entire Black Lives Matters movement was created and catalyzed by Black queer women. They've changed the entire national narrative and arguably the global narrative, pushing not just Black rights, but rights for everybody into the forefront. So again, we've always been here. We've always been pushing. I think now, you know, with technology and there's kind of a different lens and a different way, you know, we're using these stories, but I think that we just need to recognize that we're still standing on the shoulders of great leaders and continuing that conversation. And oftentimes that conversation just hasn't been heard. It's like police brutality. It was always going on. We just didn't have it on tape, you know? So it's like the same thing with the queer rights movement. It's always been there. And now there's, you know, because of technology and because there's a spotlight, some of those stories get to percolate up further.
I think kind of speaking towards that, I think as our nation, you know, as we become more diverse, you know, as, you know, awareness is raised towards gender and sexual orientation, all those things, I see, you know, just the millennials growing up and moving into those leadership positions. I think as we become more diverse, you know, our young people are leading the way. You know, they're doing the work that they need to do on that ground level, and, you know, easily see in a few decades from now, or a few years from now, doing really well.
I could add, I mean, I think the work needs to happen from the other folks that aren't in the queer community. I don't think the onus is on what is the queer community doing. It's more like, how can other people be allies and support the work of the queer community? And there was a great quote or tweet that was going around after the Orlando massacre that I read that said, you know, dear heterosexual Black man, will you stand for us the way we stood for you, from a gay Black man, you know? And so that's a question, you know, will everyone else stand up the way that they have been standing up on the front lines for us?
Thank you. On that note, what would you say allyship and advocacy actually looks like for coming from queer people of privilege, relative privilege, white, cisgender, male, affluent, able-bodied people? And how can we redefine help to look like, to be defined by the people who are, are needing that?
One of my favorite definitions of allyship, and thinking about the fact that this work has been happening for some time, right? A really great ally is someone who takes the hit but not the credit, right? So someone who can use their privilege to really shield and protect and move forward without claiming that somehow they made it up, right? Or they're bringing this to light. And that happens all the time. And I think allies need to really check their egos in this work, right? Is it really about the communities that you're working with, or is it about you and, needing to be seen as a savior, And I think that's a real conversation and reflection that a lot of our allies need to have.
I really agree with that. And I think just thinking tangibly about, like, if I'm thinking about queer and trans youth I'm working with right now, I'm thinking about something that somebody said earlier about, like, letting young people lead. So I'm thinking about, like, having money available to young people to, like, make their dreams come true. That's not, that doesn't have any strings attached to it, or doesn't have to be, like, evidence-based or something like that, right? That, like, are we supporting communities and coming up, and doing what they know already works? And so how are we funding that situation? I think also tangibly, I can't help but think about housing, and, like, just that all the queer and trans young folk that we're probably all seeing that just don't have housing. There's a host housing program that happens in Minnesota that I've always been dreaming of, like, learning more about, where folks in the community, like, are host housing folks for queer and trans youth, and where queer and trans youth get to interview them and, like, decide if they're safe enough for them to go stay with. But I wonder about, like, getting really creative about, like, housing strategies in the Bay Area, and how we could all really work together to form, like, a network of support for our young people. Because the reality is that, like, there's not the funding or the institutional support, right? Like, it's not going to happen just through, like, one program, because the need is so great right now. So those are some tangible things I'm thinking about.
Something I find, I think as we are all here, I think we're, in a sense, maybe speaking to the choir. I think we like to think that we're aware, we're conscious, and I think I want to challenge folks to bring that back to your families, your friends who may not be so supportive or aware. Have those really tough conversations over family meals and, family reunions where auntie or uncle may be spouting something where it's just like, nah, that's not right. I think those are ways folks can show up, because we can't have those conversations because they don't care about us. But if they're talking to you who they adore greatly, that has more resonance, and I think can help really allow folks to critically think about the issues.
So I think after the event also, we're going to pass out some information to all the attendees about kind of concrete ways that people can contribute and get involved. But is there anything else anyone would like to say in terms of what are things we can do right now today, in terms of donation, volunteering, mentorship, that your organizations might be needing?
Well, we love money. But that's not all you can do. I think that, particularly around the whole digital tech inclusion conversation, one thing that's been really apparent for my work at Hack the Hood is that we love the checks. However, if y'all not hiring, so when we talk about, those pathways and on-ramps and, is that real? Because the check is only going to go so far. And, think about the personal trauma and how debilitating that is for our young people who are working so hard to get something, and then to find, again, all that, 21st century skill stuff starts popping up because the technical is not enough. I think on a personal level, everybody needs to do some serious anti-oppression work, and not just the people who are coming to train you at Google, your own personal work. Privilege is transitory. We all have it. We navigate it constantly. So really focusing on, your own personal privilege and how that shows up, again, holistically in all aspects of your life, from the housing decisions that you're making to the neighborhoods that you live in. I think we, need to vote with our dollars. Every time you're spending money, you're making a conscious decision to support the new world that we want to create, or an old system that we see the havoc that it's wreaking on the world. And I think starting with your own community, I think which has been echoed here, I think the tendency is always to go outside of your community. But we've got experts in our community. We really need you being on the front lines of your own community, spreading this gospel, pushing the narrative, pushing your peers, your family members, having those uncomfortable conversations, not needing to tokenize the folks of color or the queer people in the room to bring up the folk of color or queer people conversations in the meeting. How can you be an ally if you don't identify with that way to stick up for those folks, and really make sure those conversations are being had. So that's what I think we have to kind of start small as well, and kind of really looking at like what we can do at all times. Even, myself, I'm always having to confront that conversation as well as someone that is an American citizen. I had to do a lot of work on expanding my own lens about undocumented youth, not just being limited to Latinos, to have to really be allies to my African brothers and sisters and my West Indian brothers and sisters who are part of the African diaspora. And like, wow, I didn't even think about you in the undocumented conversation, and knowing that I had people in my own community that were facing those barriers, So how can I be more of an advocate when immigration and these conversations come up, and not just thinking, oh, that doesn't include me, or that doesn't include my people, because it actually does.
I think just like bouncing off that, I think, you can write a check and maybe even hire people, but there's the problem of getting them to stay as well. And so I've worked with, two young people in particular that I'm thinking of that did go through, work development, job skills training. They got jobs, and a couple months into it, they're just like, I don't want to work for this white lady. Like, I can't really deal with this. Like, there's all these microaggressions and over, and they're out. I mean, they did all the steps that they were, shown to follow, and they got the job. Like, they were there, they made it or whatever. But then the cultures that, all these different, privileges and biases that we have that have been ingrained in us since day one, they're still going to show up, even if, I hire the person of color, I hire the young person of color, but then I make it kind of uncomfortable for them to stay there. How good is that, on its own? Like, you did kind of part of the job, but it's actually incomplete because they're leaving shortly after they're getting there. I just wanted to say that.
Anyone else? I think there's so much valuable stuff to say about this topic, and about, economic empowerment for the youth that are really struggling, getting them there, keeping them there, getting, all the benefits that come, for queer people, working within professional organizations, professional companies, as I mentioned at the beginning. So, let's do it. I think with that, I want to open it up to the audience to ask questions. And if you can just stand up and shout out something, and I'll repeat it so everyone can hear. Yeah. Just to repeat so everyone can hear, but yeah, how do the people who are being oppressed have to not be the ones to educate others about how not to oppress them, right? I learned. So.
Well, we have a module at Hack the Hood that's called code switching. And we really frame code switching as something that you're not trying to be someone else and really rooting that, but you understand that there are ways that we have to show up sometimes in different rooms. And it doesn't mean that you don't get to be your authentic self, but you are aware of that. And sometimes our young people don't even understand that that's even anything, that they're even aware of that. So I think empowering young people with that language, we also introduce the concept of microaggressions. We want them to understand that language, to have vocabulary, to understand that they have their own power to navigate. And we really frame, it was one of the most difficult modules to create, and I did a lot of work writing it because there was no a solution at the end. It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to do this and then everything's going to be okay. It's like, you know what? I'm going to give you some language and some tools, and I really hope that you can use these in life. And I think that that really speaks to that 21st century toolbox that I talked about, where we're empowering young people with a set of tools that they can use to navigate and architect and build a life that they want to live. And that they have the self-confidence to give that pushback in a corporate setting to a supervisor, to speak their truth, to understand how they can navigate, to have a support system, and to start addressing these things and understanding that there's also some systematic things at play that we haven't really talked about. We've done a lot of talk today about individuals and organizations, but there's also like this whole system we're part of called the United States of America, that's like a capitalist system. And so, you know, how are we also bringing that in as well to the conversation, even from something as simple as what it means to be an entrepreneur, and reframing what that means. And so just making money isn't sufficient if you're not thinking about people, if you're not thinking about the planet. So even, you know, we don't have to just limit businesses to capitalist endeavors. So, you know, it's a whole kind of context, I think, that we really have to work to build, and for young people to see themselves as part of that, and to understand that, you know, your job doesn't define who you are. Something else we do is we create a life title. Every young person creates a life title for themselves, not a job title, a life title. So your job title will come and go. Some people don't have a job, so they may feel like they don't have any, you know, what is their purpose? And so young people use the StrengthsFinder activity to actually create a life title, like I'm a solutionary, I'm a pathfinder, I'm a strategic cultivator. So they understand that, you know, your worth is not defined by your job and who's, you know, bigging you up, that you're part of something bigger than this, and that this job is one part of a very long journey that you're going to be on. So again, it still comes back to the confidence building, and how can we really work to address the trauma that really keeps us from being our greatest selves.
So in light of all the negativity that we've been feeling this week, in light of the incident over the weekend in Orlando, what are some positive takeaways about the impact that you're making in your organizations, and how we're really reaching people and making change?
So there's, I'm not going to remember the website right now, but I'm going to get it to you. I will get it to you. But we had the honor and privilege, 7 queer and trans young people who come to our space made these really dope digital stories about the impact of mental health on their life. So they're not always like the easiest stories to watch, but it's kind of amazing that there's like this really cool free curriculum thing out there. So I think that's one cool thing that we're doing, is we're trying to change the narrative around mental health, particularly like holding queer and trans youth of color at the center. And so it's really cool and it's really cute. And there's a flyer back there with pictures of like the young people on it. Really cute.
So one question I meant to answer earlier was just kind of what I would want you to know about the population we serve. The thing with homeless youth in San Francisco, any one of y'all, you know, any of the youth that I work with can be amongst y'all and y'all wouldn't even know. So, I mean, I think there's this kind of stereotype of what a homeless person looks like, a homeless youth looks like. And it's, you know, I mean, I think the youth that I've worked with, you know, they've gone to Stanford, they've worked at eBay, you know, so, I mean, it's just one of those things where homelessness can happen to anyone. And some of, our youth in general, given the fact that 40% of all homeless youth are LGBT, that says a lot in terms of the experiences they have of rejection and exclusion. Couple that with challenges in the educational system where youth are bullied, and the fact that I believe 30 some odd states don't have non-discrimination laws for LGBT people. I think with all those kind of challenges, being able to be in a space, watching young people grow for 2 years, kind of blossom into themselves. Salud. One of my favorite stories is a young person who came into services and very beginning of their transition, very isolated, very disconnected from their family, a lot of mental health challenges, and through our work together, really blossoming into her own, finding her community, being able to fully transition and be on the path, getting education down, employment, stably employed for 1 year, a lot can happen in 2 years. And so I think with the right support, the right mentors, the right kind of folks, pushing, encouraging folks, pushing for success, I think that can make a huge impact. If I may add one more story. I think another aspect is like, there was a quote that someone had mentioned where and this one was related to trans youth. It was like trans affirming services can be a form of suicide prevention. And so looking at how we can be culturally competent, how we can be strong allies, that can be the solution to help kind of ease things for folks.
Yeah, I think for me, so a little bit of conflict with this question just because I was raised by 2 Mexican Catholic parents. So humility, it's all about humility. So I'll try a little bit. So I think for me, I think one of the daunting tasks was, being an LGBT programs coordinator in a system of about 60,000 kids. So what does impact mean? What does it mean to change a system? And I think I arrived at a point where I was like, I can't do it all alone. I have to work with community. So over the past, 2.5 years, it's been really about how can I not just work with kids individually, get them access to services, but then also make sure my community is on board to support me in this work. In this last year, I was really lucky to implement a program where we provide confidential LGBT support groups across multiple high schools, where students who identify can come in without stigma and seek mentorship and information from other queer adults like them, and not just any queer adults, but also queer adults of color. So in creating that program and kind of in advocating for it, I was unapologetic in my ask to my colleagues, to our program directors of like, if we're gonna do this right, we need to have queer POC staff on board. And it was challenging, but we made it happen. And this year, which is our first full year of implementation, we had contact with about 75 queer POC kids in our school district, which to me is an accomplishment. Because in the past, I think we over-relied on extracurricular clubs to catch kids. And what we found was there were some kids in there, and we had a lot of enthusiastic allies, a lot of girls, which is great. But that's not always the means in which we can work with our kids directly and go deeper. So I think the school system has seen the need, and I think has seen the positive relationships that we can have across generations. And so continue to push for that, and continue to push for community to be involved and to infiltrate our systems is very important. And I also want to give a shout out to, there's an audience member, Dar Garcia over there, who was one of my infiltrators as well.
So I'm kind of feeling a little weird about that question, sorry, but, well, actually not sorry. I feel a little weird because every time that we talk about a lot of the things that we're talking might seem negative, but I actually don't see them as negative. I actually see them as constructive. So it really depends up to you how you want to take that. I see that very constructively. all of the stories and things that we're currently sharing. And even if it's negative, I feel like society has created this social amnesia where we want to like not really see that. We want to like pretend that it's not there. And because we're talking about it, it's opening that wound. All of the things that we're currently doing is like creating a small band-aid on like the bigger social challenges that currently happen. So if you feel triggered, if you like a wound is currently open, it's okay. You know, it's okay if you feel any type of feeling, if you think it's too negative, it's fine, it's totally fine. The positive is that I am breathing right now, that I'm alive. Just the fact that a queer person of color is alive today, that's a positive actually. And you know, just think about that. Just think about how the fact that a queer person of color is just breathing is actually a positive thing, because we were supposed to be dead from colonization 500 years ago. 500 years ago, my two-spirit people were supposed to be completely exterminated, but I'm still here. So the fact that I'm here, it's like a positive.
So for all of you that are working on the ground with youth, you have so much to give and so much to offer, but what is the one thing that you would hope that youth take away after having some contact with you through your work?
I'll keep it really short. A moment of relief. I think, being able to talk to someone and maybe be authentic, and even in a second, can be a life-saving moment. Can bring at least a moment of hope, or at least plant that seed. So to me, relief, I think, stands out.
I think fierce love, that they know that they're fiercely loved, that they don't ever have to silo off any piece of their identity to show up and be with us.
I would just want them to remember that they have the power. You have the power is what I would want them to be able to hold in times of difficulty, that everything that they need is within them.
During challenging bits, I tell folks, hey, we got you. Now let's get some work done.
Oh, is that me?
Could you put the mic up a little closer?
Oh, this better? Yeah, I really like Zakia's statement. I guess if with the youth that I'm working with, I want them to know that, yeah, they're their own answer for things, for whatever it is. Like, they can be the best solution for whatever it is that they're facing.
So I also work with youth actually, which is fun to do because I'm also youth. And we actually did this activity before too. Like one word, like we went around with like which was the word that came out to their mind when they first saw me, and they were like decolonization, and I'm like, yay! So decolonization.
Real talk. So, any final questions? So I think the question is, how can companies like Google and other tech companies represent the stories and the identities of the people who need that represented and need to see more of themselves within those spheres?
I think there were two things that came to mind. I think folks got to work harder. I think that, and we love Google, and I love Google, but I think we have to go beyond just a Google search. I think that their stories are out there, but you have to work a lot harder to find them. And I think that even with hiring, right, that's always the MO. We don't know anybody, and it's always like, I feel like white privilege always gets to say that. We can't find enough people. We don't know anybody. We couldn't see the thing. And it's like people of color never have that privilege of saying they don't know. Go to a job and tell your boss you don't know. They'll find someone else to do the job. But white privilege always gets to say they don't know. And so I think the stories are out there. There's tons of stories out there. So how can companies like Google work harder to maybe move beyond just the people that are trending or the stories that we get bombarded with? Like you were saying that you were reading all these stories about Orlando. You know, we get these dominant messages that are made the program of the week until the new conversation, you know, the new traumatic thing. And we can't just focus on that narrative. We have to seek other narratives. We have to seek other sources of information. We have to seek other communities. Like, we're all local. We're all in your community. How many of you guys knew about us before walking into this room? And it's great that this is a platform, but we can't just become so complacent that we only give an ear to what's easy and what's easy to find. And so I think that I think folks just have to work a little bit harder to lift up those stories and to understand that sometimes they're not going to be as polished and not going to be as savvy, and maybe you're using a different language, maybe you're speaking with a different kind of dialect and tone. They might dress differently, hairstyles might look, you know, we have to open ourselves up to gaining wisdom from people who maybe don't personify, you know, a cis white male of what, you know, what a construction of power looks like. We have to kind of start unpacking that a little bit. So that's one thing.
Yeah, on that too, I think it might be less in terms of like, oh, you know, what algorithm can we write so that different news stories can come up? But I think a lot of it is like from internal, because if you have a very specific demographic that's running the show, thinking about how they can change to address this other demographic, you might as well just get the other demographic to figure out what they like, how a company could be run or function that would address them. Because, you know, if you're gonna have maybe like, you know, a straight white cis male that's really affluent trying to figure out what we can do to help maybe a queer person of color, it's probably best to just ask the queer person of color, hire them, bring them in, and then, you know, the needs of that community and the ideas and the solutions of those people and those communities are naturally going to get infused into the environment and the products and the services that a company provides, because they're the people that are part of the company now, and they're making these things. So yeah, like to think about how a company can better address stuff, I think it really might be really effective to just, you know, bring those people into the first point of decision making.
For everyone in the room that's come here to see you guys speak and share what you do, what can we do? What's the one concrete thing that we can do right now? You know, go home and do to help contribute to make change.
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is it's Pride Month. So right now is a great opportunity to really get involved in local communities. And I'm not talking about Pink Party or whatever happens at Civic Center or the parade. You know, I'm really, you know, thinking about all those opportunities in which, especially folks of color and queer folks of color, are telling their stories. Right? We're talking about storytelling. We're talking about information, and all these little local events are happening in the Mission. They're happening in San Francisco. They're happening in Oakland. Go. You know, patronize those artists, patronize that community, you know, give them your money, really get a sense of what's going on with them, because they're telling their stories now. They've been telling their stories for years, and especially this month, they're telling their stories now. So really seek those opportunities to engage community, to think about ways in which you can help local artists, local community, and really get involved. I mean, the time is now.
I would say educate yourself, be a lifelong student. You know, I'm always trying to learn more information about everything, pretty much. I'm a student of history. I think history informs so much of the present. I think you did a great job of really framing that for us, that so much of this is just been going on. And I think when you're informed from a place of history, you have more perspective and insight on how to address the future. So I think education, and I think just starting really small and starting with yourself. Like Google's made up of people. You're a person, so start with yourself. I think sometimes we're always going outside. How can the company do something? Well, how can I do something? And what am I doing every day? And how am I making that something that happens during Pride Month, but something that's a lifestyle? Because that's what we're always trying to really engage our young people on. We're really trying to disrupt the status quo and get them on a new track so they can kind of have a different context for life. And I think that everybody needs to be part of that kind of shift. So how can we start thinking about every single thing we do, from the clothes that we're wearing to the way that we're engaging the people that we live in and the communities that we live in, and where we're spending our dollars, and the groups that we're coming to, and the friends that we engage with, and the conversations that are having, and the micro, like every single part of life is an opportunity to really be that change. And I think that the more we start thinking about our lives that way, we then become the catalyst for change as a collective and as a global community.
There's this question that we always ask ourselves and center our work around. We say, how do we show fierce love for ourselves and for our community? And so I think I would maybe leave you with that question for you to reflect on for yourself. And I think I would also say that, I mean, I'm a person who really believes that relationships are like at the heart of everything, right? We have to connect with one another and build community with one another. So my earlier invitation still stands that we have a monthly intergenerational community dinner, potluck style, at our space. And I think if you want, you could come and start building community with young people there. Or in other places. Everybody's doing amazing work.
All right. Yeah, I think definitely starting like personally is probably, I think, the best way to, if you want to take some sort of action, really reflecting on yourself and your own privileges. And, you know, if you have a certain number, you know, this like bucket of privilege that you have, you know, how do you want to use that? And you know, how do you want to spend that privilege? You know, you can just, you know, go out and party, have a great time, enjoy a really nice life, but, you know, you can sacrifice some time or energy. I mean, writing a check's really great. I'm sure any of the organizations wouldn't mind a check. But, you know, there's something that can go a lot more, which is like if you know, volunteer with youth or get involved with an organization, provide services, like even just your technical skills that an organization might need to pay somebody for, and they can't afford to pay somebody for that position. You come in and providing like operations or some sort of systems admin like skill, something that you're already doing maybe here at your own job. And just providing that in another context where maybe you're spending time and you're not getting paid for it. It might be in an environment that's, you know, not really cush. But getting uncomfortable and like giving a little sacrifice, like, you know, there's a lot of people under oppression that are constantly uncomfortable and you know, spending time that's unnecessary on just like daily acts of living. And if we're lucky enough and privileged enough to not have to be uncomfortable in our work environment, in society, and we're not spending time and money just trying to, you know, get our daily lives done, you know, kind of, I mean, that's really lucky for us to not have to deal with that. So I think getting uncomfortable and like being willing to make sacrifices that some people are doing on the regular because they have to, that's definitely a way, I think, to get involved more.
Any parents in the room? Oh my God, you're so young. I'm a parent too. There's 3 of us. That's awesome. But, you know, aunties, uncles in the room. Okay, nieces and nephews. Hopefully you're connected to some young people, whether they identify as queer or not. I think you know, to some extent, we're getting older. We got work to do as adults, but sometimes I look at the adults and I'm just kind of like, all is lost. Let's focus on the young. I'm joking. But, you know, let's really focus on the young people. I think we forget that sometimes, that we have young people in our families, in our lives that we're around, and we have to make sure that we're really training them and educating them to be the type of adults that we want to have to really be global citizens. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, you know, there's young people who, you know, don't even know how to like speak to someone when they walk into the room, or do they know how to like acknowledge difference? Do they understand the same conversations that we're having? Like, how can we really also work with young people who are really the future? Because they're the ones that are building. They're not even the future, they're the now, right? They're the ones that are really going to be inheriting all these problems on the planet. And so we have to make sure that we're really empowering the next generation of young people who maybe don't have all these barriers to be able to be at the table with folks that do have the barriers, because that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. And I think there's a lot of work that we need to do in that arena. San Francisco, you know, has like less children than any other major city in America, has the smallest population of children. It also has the greatest disparity between economically. So they have some of the richest children in America live in San Francisco, and some of the poorest children live in San Francisco. And the majority of the folks that are maybe on the lower side of the economic spectrum are folks of color. There's also more dogs here than children, which is very interesting. But you know, I mean, that also like speaks a lot to the culture, right? So, I mean, again, how are we really empowering young people and really making sure that they are trained up to navigate this world?
I have 2 dogs. So, I agree with everything that was said before. So I think that it should start from like the inside, so starting with yourself. But just wanna share this. I'm not gonna say names, but I was hanging out with one of my friends on 24th Street, and she said, "Oh, one of my friends is coming over with, you know, just to hang with us too." And I was like, "Oh, fine, great, cool, whatever." But before the friend came with us, I asked her, "So, is she white?" And she said yes. And I was like, "Is she new?" And she was like, "Yeah, she's been living here for 2 months." And I'm like, "Okay." We meet, and I was carrying some feathers. And she says, "What is that?" And I said, "Oh, you know, well, I'm an Aztec dancer." And she says, "Wait, what is that?" And I'm like, "Oh, we're usually dancing on 24 Mission." And then I ask her, "Where do you live?" And she says, 24 Mission. And I'm like, can I drop the mic? She says 24 Mission. And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, interesting. So engage." Just want to say that, like, you know, 24 Mission, and she hasn't even seen the fact that I've been there dancing for a long time, and it's just crazy. So when you stand anywhere you are, try to acknowledge yourself. Try to acknowledge the people that are around you. Even if you don't know them, you don't have to say hi. You don't even have to smile. Just stand. Go. If you're one of those persons that walk really fast, try to walk slower.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Just my last words. Your work is life-changing, and in a lot of ways it's life-saving, and I don't exaggerate there. So really, to be on the ground, working with all of these youth in desperate situations, and youth that are seeing them thrive and seeing them come through that, it's amazing, and every day is hard. So thank you. Thanks again. So one more round of applause, please. Thank you.